Hello, I'm Wayne from TorqueCars. We're going to have a chat about tyres. Think about the tyre as the only point of contact between your car and the road surface. So never overlook the importance of your tyre. So here we're going to collate all of the information that we put together about tyres. We're going to look at the sizes, the speed ratings, the load indexes on the side of the tyre. We're going to look at all season tyres and compare those with summer tyres and winter tyres. We're going to tell you everything you need to know about tyre pressures and choosing an appropriate tyre to suit your car so you can maximise the performance of it. And along the way we'll be dropping lots of handy little hints that we've picked up over the years when it comes to choosing tyres. Some nice features that come with tyres now is a little rim protector, which is a raised rubber block, and it really does effectively protect the rims of your wheels against all of those curbs, and it certainly saved my life a few times. So look out for the little rim protector label, and if you just rub your finger around the inside of the tyre you can actually see how deep that is, and generally you want it to be about the depth of your finger. We're also going to look at these numbers 16, 19. So the 16, 19, this indicates firstly the 16 is the week of manufacturer and the year is 19, so 16th week of 2019. So we're looking at a tyre here that was manufactured April the 15th 2019 to April the 21st 2019, and it's important to know how old a tyre is because rubber does degrade with its age, and you certainly don't want to put really ancient tyres on your car. And also if you're buying a car, it can sometimes give an indication as to whether someone has fitted worn tyres to the car, and if they have, you've got to question all the other maintenance that's carried on. And we'll be specifically looking at tyre pressures and why people add nitrogen to their tyres and whether this is a good idea. So maintaining your tyre pressure is very important. You'll always find inside a car there's a little panel somewhere that will show you the typical tyres that the manufacturer recommends. It's usually 2 or 3 different rim sizes. In my case it's 17-inch or 18-inch rims. There's also a choice of tread widths and tyre profiles. So you just look down the chart until you find yours, and there's different conditions. So a fully loaded car will need higher pressures, or if you're doing a lot of motorway driving you need to increase those pressures a little, and it'll recommend typically a different pressure for the front and the rear of the car. So pay close attention to this and make sure that your car is always within those PSIs. Bear in mind that those markings indicate cold pressures. When a tyre warms up, the pressure will increase. So most people will go to a garage to check their tyre pressures, and unless it's a short journey your tyre has started to warm up. So it's possible to get your tyre pressure spot on at the garage, and then when you come home and measure it you'll notice that it's a few PSI out. We've also heard from people who fill their tyres with nitrogen. Now nitrogen molecules are larger than oxygen molecules, so you don't get the same seepage or loss of pressure over time. But we don't really think it's worth going to that. Standard air that you pump into your tyre is 78% nitrogen anyway and about 20% oxygen. So as the oxygen and the smaller air molecules dissipate, you'll have a higher concentration of nitrogen in your tyre anyway, and you'll go to the garage and top that up, and then as that leaks out your concentration of nitrogen will increase naturally anyway. Nitrogen doesn't make the tyres any significantly lighter. The only benefit is they're less prone to the temperature variation in pressures, and they maintain their pressure over a longer period of time. If your tyre pressures are wrong, you'll notice you get different uneven wear pattern across the tread. So higher pressures will typically wear the centre of the tyre out more quickly, and lower pressure tends to put the wear and tear on the edge of the tyre. So if you regularly measure the tyre tread depth across the tread pattern, you can actually determine whether you typically overinflate or underinflate your tyres. And you really want to try and even things out. On a front wheel drive car you will obviously be wearing the front tyres more than the back tyres, so just rotating the front tyres to the rear and the rears to the front can actually maximise the lifespan of the car and even out the tyre wear. If you've got a quattro system, it's often recommended that your tread depth is the same on each axle, and if you can across all 4 wheels especially. If your car was say 2mm bigger on one side and 1mm smaller on the other side, so you've got a 3mm difference, that can really upset the differential that assumes that one wheel is spinning faster than the other, and it can divert the power to the alternative wheel to even out that speed, and it can affect the stability of the car. So read your manual. Manufacturers have got different ways of getting around this. It's really annoying if you get a puncture and you have to replace all of your tyres, or at least both tyres on one axle. First of all, we're going to look at the numbers on the side of the tyre, because these typically are the most important thing when you go to buy a tyre. You want it to fit your car. So there was a genius that came up with the idea of keeping everyone happy when defining these measurements that go on the side of the tyre, because the first large number is in millimetres, the second smaller number is a percentage, and then you've got inches. So that larger number in millimetres, that's the cross section across the tyre. The slightly smaller number is a percentage of that width, which shows the height of the tyre, or the depth or the profile of that tyre. And then the final number, the inches you've got, that matches the rim size. So you clearly need to get a tyre that will fit your rim. You can't fit smaller or bigger tyres to a standard rim. Now, changing the size of the wheel will affect the gearing. If your wheel is smaller, it will reduce your top speed, but it will increase your acceleration. And if your wheel is larger, the opposite will happen. So to get round that effect, most people go for a larger alloy wheel with a lower profile tyre. And again, the perception is that those low profile tyres give you much better grip and traction. The other problem you've got is curbs. If you've only got a small amount of rubber, most of your alloy wheel is going to be in line with all of the curbs, and you're going to get a lot of scratches. It's one of my big pet hates, having cars with dents on the alloy wheels. They just look terrible over time. So think about that. Now, I've had an A3 and I've had 19-inch wheels on it, and I didn't like that at all. It adversely affected the handling. A lot of them come with 18-inch wheels, which is certainly better than the larger wheels. But again, having had one now with 17-inch wheels, I much prefer the handling. It feels much better, it's more comfortable to drive. I don't feel every single ripple in the road surface anymore. So there's a lot to be said for thinking about the car as a package. Not just setting it up for a track where you're expecting completely flat surfaces, but thinking about our roads, the potholes, the undulations, the adverse cambers. The tyre has to cope with all of those things. So bear that in mind when you're specifying alloy wheels for your car. And try and look at the weight as well. The weight is probably one of the single biggest things when you're adding a wheel to a car, and you can get lighter weight alloy wheels. There's also a perception that wider wheels always give you better grip. But actually, if you were under a tyre and it was on a piece of glass, you could see the contact patch, which is very tiny in relation to the overall wheel size. So on a narrow wheel, you've got a fairly square contact patch, and on a wider wheel that tends to be slightly shorter and slightly wider, so you're not actually gaining very much contact patch. And also a wider wheel will trap more water, more snow, and it'll be more prone to aquaplaning than a thinner wheel, which surprises a lot of people. But it's one of those things where if you look at something on paper, it seems to make sense, but then when you put it on your car and take it out into the real world, you hit on all these problems and issues that just didn't come up in theory. And sadly, a lot of people have wasted a lot of money buying a wheel that's inappropriate for their car. Although there's a little bit of wiggle room when it comes to the width of the tyre and the profile, so we've got a little bit to play with there. But generally the manufacturers will specify an optimum selection of tyre. Another important marking on the side of the tyre is the load rating. Now, they used to show how many ply there were in the tyre and the construction. You often still get an R to indicate it's a radial construction. You'd never mix radial and the older cross-ply tyres, but thankfully most of the tyres you get nowadays are radial and they're consistent. But the load rating actually shows you the amount of weight that tyre can carry. So depending on how they've constructed the tyre and how many little layers of reinforcement there are inside it, it has a big bearing on how much load that tyre can carry. So we often also see a speed rating for a tyre. We'll just pop those up on the screen now so you can have a look at the various popular speed ratings of tyres. Now, you might be thinking, I never drive at 150 miles an hour. Why do I need a tyre that's rated for that? Well, it's more than just the top speed, it's the load. So if you've got a car capable of 150 miles an hour, you're putting a certain amount of stress from the torque of the engine into the tyre every time you accelerate, every time you brake and on cornering. So that speed rating takes into account those loads, and it's a tested maximum speed. So the tyre will usually perform beyond that level. But when you come to doing lots of high speed or track day driving, the temperature in the tyre builds up quite a lot, and that can affect significantly the structure of the tyre, how stable that tyre is. So it makes a big difference. So it really is important to just make sure you have the appropriate speed rating for your car. And if you've tuned your car and upped the power, it certainly makes sense to go to a slightly higher speed rating to cope with those extra stresses and strains that all that extra torque is putting through the engine. So the load rating is per tyre. So if you've got a car with 4 tyres, which is fairly average, there are obviously other options around, you multiply it by 4 to get the overall load rating or maximum weight of the car. So a 66 load index is 300 kilograms, or a car up to 1,200 kilograms. 108 load index is 1,000 kilograms, or a car that can weigh up to 4,000 kilograms. There's also often icons, typically a mountain icon on the side of the tyre to show if it's optimised for driving in wet or wintry weather conditions, and some countries may use some sort of snowflake icon to indicate a winter tyre. So which season tyre should you go for? Summer tyres typically have a 20% shorter stopping distance in the summer when the roads are dry, but the downside is they don't perform anywhere near as well in the wet. So your stopping distance could end up being 20% worse in those weather conditions. A winter tyre is exactly the opposite. In winter times your stopping distances will be 20% better, but as the weather warms up and the road is dry, those winter tyres perform much worse and can add 20% to your braking distance. So are all season tyres good in both seasons? Well, they're not brilliant in both seasons. They're a compromise. So rather than lose 20% of your grip in the winter or lose 20% in the summer, they're set up to give an average amount of grip all year round. So in a country like ours, the UK, we get a lot of rain, a lot of cold weather, but not extremely cold weather. It would certainly make sense to go for an all-season tyre. In other areas, there might be a much bigger demarcation between summer temperatures and weather conditions being dry and winter wet weather conditions, and you get lots of snow and ice and extremely low temperatures. So in those instances, it really does pay to have 2 sets of tyres, one biased towards the summer use and one biased towards the winter use. Now you might be saying that's going to cost me a lot of extra money, but actually you're doubling the life of your tyre. You're not burning up your winter tyres in summer because it's a softer compound and wears more quickly. And you've got 2 sets of tyres, so that's twice the lifespan on those tyres. It's obviously going to depend a lot on how important performance is to you in each of those seasons and how much driving you do. We've seen people get an extra set of alloy wheels so they can just unbolt the wheel and put the new wheel on with the new tyre as the season changes, which makes a lot more sense than having to take the car to somewhere to have the tyres taken off and placed on. The other issue is obviously storage of those wheels, but it really is worth it, and until you've actually used a winter snow tyre in the snow, you do not realise just how good they are. They significantly improve traction and braking and can be a real lifesaver. So when you're buying a tyre, most countries have got some sort of rating system that show the wet grip, the fuel efficiency, the rolling resistance, the noise of the tyre, and a low fuel consumption tyre can actually save about 6% of your fuel. It's got a lower rolling resistance. But often lower rolling resistances mean slightly less grip, slightly less performance. So you can see where we're going with this. There's always a compromise when it comes to choosing a tyre. And also as the tyre wears, the characteristics can substantially change. For example, a car tyre that's quite near to the legal minimum is brilliant in dry weather in the summer. They use slick tyres on race cars for a reason, because you've got the maximum tread contact patch with the ground. But as soon as you get water in there, that water is not dispelled and the car will aquaplane so much more easily. We've seen some people get new tyres for a track day and actually shave off some of the tread so they've got the optimum tread depth to give them the maximum grip. You'll find also that a lot of these track day tyres and semi-slick tyres are made from a much softer compound which is much more grippy. So it doesn't do great for your fuel consumption, but you're not going to a track to measure your fuel consumption. You're going there to enjoy the car's performance. So to eke out every last little drip of performance, it really does pay to get a softer compound and something that's designed for being used on the track. The tread patterns also significantly affect the tyre. So a lot of sports tyres have a directional tread pattern, so the tyre can only be fitted to rotate in one direction on the car. You'll typically see a V-shape tread pattern with fairly long blocks coming out into a V, which is brilliant for cornering and it also works quite well in the wet. But on an everyday road car you need stability, and depending on how the tread blocks are designed, whether there's a solid shoulder on the outside or across the tread pattern, it can significantly affect the straight line stability, the resistance to aquaplaning. So we're going to go into tread patterns in another video because it's a really big topic. We just really wanted to cover your choice of tyres and some of the common things to look out for, and the fact that all season tyres are not necessarily good in all seasons. They're just not terrible in off seasons where you've got the extremes of temperature. And there's a big difference between branded tyres and cheap tyres. Often they'll perform similarly straight out of the box, but as they start to wear, they will usually wear more quickly. I've had some branded tyres that have lasted me nearly 2 years, and I've had some cheaper unbranded tyres that I've worn out in 9,000 miles. Now, it wasn't 50% of the difference in the cost that I benefited, so in the long run I'm going to be paying a lot more on budget tyres. And those budget tyres, as they wore down, the grip dramatically reduced, whereas the branded tyres are designed to maintain their performance as the tread wears. They'll actually, instead of just cutting straight blocks into the tread patterns, it will be tapered so you get the same sort of performance as the tyre starts to wear. And for best performance, don't mix tread patterns across the axles. Try and keep the tyres the same on the fronts and rears. Look out for very cheap tyres. We wouldn't recommend you buy part 1 tyres. They often come from breakers yards where cars have been involved in accidents. So they might have heavy braking wear and flat spots on them. Or they may not have been correctly maintained, or they may have been subject to repairs in the past. If you don't really know the history of the tyre, you need to be really careful. And remoulds is where they strip off the tread and they mould new tread onto the tyres. They're often cheaper, but we've heard a lot of people complaining about the longevity of these and the reliability and the tread patterns. It's often all done on the cheap. If it was me and my car and my family's safety, I would really want to invest in a good set of premium tyres. So we really hope that this video has been useful to you. It's given you a little insight into the world of tyres, and when you go and buy your next set of tyres, you're going to be informed and able to make an informed decision. So please stay tuned if you want to keep tuning your car and keeping it working at its optimum efficiency. If you haven't subscribed already, please do so. We've got lots of other interesting videos planned and coming up that you'll certainly find beneficial and helpful. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.